Good evening. Welcome to the Development Management Committee. I'm Councillor Kieran Bowker, the Chair of this committee. Before we start the meeting, I need to make the public attending aware of the following. We're not expecting a fire drill, so if the fire alarm goes off, please make your way out of the nearest emergency exit and gather at the front of Runnymede Hall. Meetings of the committee are webcast and broadcast on the internet. If you're sitting in the public area of the council chamber, it's possible that your image will become part of the broadcast. And lastly, may I ask all present to switch mobile phones to silent. May I ask the Development Management Committee members who are seated in the front row of the chamber in front of me to introduce themselves, stating name only, starting on my left.
Councillor Alan Aycott.
Councillor Carol Sate.
Councillor John Anderson.
Good evening, Councillor Rob Lillis.
Councillor Steve Mountford.
Good evening all, Councillor Russ Savage.
Councillor Jackie Thornton.
And Councillor Tom Skip.
May I ask the officers to present that are present to introduce themselves again, starting on my left.
Keith Zammit, Planning Officer.
Stephen Garner, the Planning Manager.
Cheryl Salmon, and I'll be taking minutes.
Good evening, David Bland, the Legal Advisor to the Committee.
Hannah Blaney, Trainee Solicitor.
May I ask any other members present to introduce themselves?
Councillor Andrew Thornton.
Councillor Mike Dearson.
Councillor John Knott.
Thank you very much. The first item on the agenda is apologies. Are there any apologies for absence?
Chair, I have apologies from Councillor Barton Brown, and therefore Councillor Savage is substituting. Councillor Howlett and Councillor Mountford is the substitute member. Also the Vice Chairman, Councillor Gregg, no substitute. And Canvey Island Town Councillor Steve Sate has given his apologies as well.
Thank you, Cheryl. Are there any members' interests?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I need to declare a non-pecuniary interest as I'm a member of the Cost of Point Leisure, so I declare a non-pecuniary interest in agenda item 5, number 4. Please on that agenda. Thank you. I will be remaining in the chamber for the debate.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to declare an interest in that residents have contacted me and I have passed the information on to the relevant officers.
Application, Councillor Thornton.
And also 179 Kiln Road.
Thank you, Councillor.
Oh, Councillor Savage.
Sorry, Councillor Savage.
I was told by the CEO that I didn't need to declare a pecuniary interest, a non-pecuniary interest, as I was formerly a Shell employee. And there are 2 items on here relating to the Shell petrol station, which I believe is run by a franchise. So I was told that I didn't need to declare it, but I will declare it by way of being open, honest and transparent.
Thank you, Councillor. Item 3 is minutes. Are the minutes for the Development Management Committee held on the 5th of September 2023 agreed? Public speakers. On item 1, Mr. Choi will speak in objection and Mr. Bradley will speak in support. On item 2, Mr. Thorns will speak in objection and Mr. Mahon will speak in support. On item 3, Mr. Thorns will again speak in objection and again Mr. Mahon will speak in deport. Item 5, deposited plans. Item 1 is the site of Warren and Tanglewood, Hall Crescent, Hadleigh. I'll now hand over to the Planning Officer to present this item.
Thanks very much. Right. We've got the 2 existing properties located on the corner of... There we are. Corner of Hall Crescent and London Road. So at the moment the site is surrounded by residential properties on two sides, allotments across the road, and a building that's got a clinic use into the west. This is the two properties we're talking about here. And just a slightly more close-up view, you can see they've got front gardens, parking, dormers. So the proposal is to remove the two properties that are currently on this site and to replace them with a Part 3, Part 4 storey 12 flat development. So the site plan, you can see, well, I hope you can pick out here, there's a couple of parking spaces on the frontage, L-shaped building at ground floor with more parking at the rear. The development has car stacking, which we'll probably come on to a bit more later, to accommodate 4 cars where 2 would usually park. Cycle and bin storage. Then as we move up the building, you've got first floor, more flats. Then second floor, similar footprint to the first. And then the top floor is stepped in. So this will, it's a smaller footprint. This will probably be a bit more easy to see here. So the front is the east elevation here. So the roof would be kind of a mansard style, as I call it. Then the top floor would be sitting behind, as you can see there. The dotted line hasn't really come out too well on this, but the point of that drawing was to show that somebody standing on the pavement across the other side of the road, their sight line would be such that the top floor wouldn't be seen from the sort of the streets immediately adjacent to the site. Although in longer views, you know, if you're driving along London Road, yeah, you would see it. The architect has put in some 3D views for us, just to kind of give a bit more of a flavour of the scheme. You can only really see so much from elevation drawings. The car stacking that I mentioned earlier, if you look closely there, you can just kind of see what looks like a garage at the back of the site. That's what I was talking about. And again, this is kind of looking over the fence from next door. You can see like a garage structure there, which would have like a stacking system in for cars to be lowered into like a pit so that another one can park on top. So it just kind of doubles up on the space you've got. That's sort of just another view for you. The car stacking, I thought that perhaps like a section through that would give you a little bit more sort of idea of what's actually being proposed. So this car would sink down from ground level being there. That one can go down into the bottom and the car that's on top can then come out. So nobody's ever going to get stuck. If you can see on here, this is an overlay of the existing building, the existing Tanglewood and the Warren in red. The grey is the proposed building footprint. So that's just showing how it's a little bit nearer to Hall Crescent than the existing buildings, but broadly in line with what's there at the moment and the adjoining property, number 1 Hall Crescent here. Right, just briefly, I think it's probably worth mentioning the objections we've had to the scheme. We'll probably talk about these quite a bit, I would imagine, but from going through the comments we've had, mainly the building line, I think, is something that's come up a lot. Yeah, it is slightly closer to the street than existing buildings, but from an officer's point of view, it's not so different to what's there at the moment that we would say, yeah, we'd support refusal on those grounds. We've had a lot of parking objections as well. I mean, I've been to that street quite a few times over the years, as well as, you know, in the last month or two. And yeah, it is quite hard to find a parking space. This development has one parking space per flat, which that's probably going to be discussed quite a bit, I would imagine. In a location that's got quite a lot of bus services and things, you've got town centre nearby with lots of shops. The government is telling us that we shouldn't be providing too much parking. It's an inefficient use of land. We should be trying to get housing on brownfield sites as much as we can, just so we take a little bit of pressure off building on greenfield sites and that kind of thing. Finally, we've had, I noticed overlooking came up a lot in the comments as well. We'll just go back to, I think perhaps here. Yeah, you have got, say, like gardens of properties here and here might be sort of having a block of flats where there was 2 houses. There is a bit of overlooking that takes place at the moment. Replacing them 2 properties with a block of flats, you could say, yeah, that might lead to a little bit more overlooking. I suppose the view you're going to have to come to is whether it's so much more overlooking that you'd want to be turning down the scheme. Officer's point of view would be that it's not perhaps so much worse that's there now than what's there now that would be sort of justified. But that's something I would imagine, we'll probably discuss. So to summarise, my recommendation is one of approval. Starts on page 12. So I'm recommending a Section 106 agreement if your members are minded to grant planning permission. That's to cover contributions to improvement of healthcare facilities to take account of the new residents and that sort of thing. And a number of conditions. So hand back to you, Chairman.
Thank you, Kev. Mr. Choi, would you like to make your statement, please? And just to remind you, you have 3 minutes. Thank you very much.
Indeed. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, members of the committee. My name is Mr. Choi, as you heard. I am speaking in objection of this particular planning application on behalf of all of the residents in Hall Crescent. So, your planning officer's report, very thorough, but in one sentence, it is disconnected from reality. The reality of actually having those blocks of flats in the area, the reality of the overlooking, it is not, as it would say, the very subjective mind of saying it is not that overlooked, it's everything else. So what I would like to really focus on are the 2 policy points within the adopted local plan, which are the H9 and also the H13. They're quite, well, they are very much related to each other in that, is this development going to be harmful to the character of the actual area? And the residents of Hall Crescent would all say together that it is. We saw on the overlay just a moment ago how much further along into the London Road, closer to the London Road it is. It is slightly over from the actual original point in Hall Crescent, and you might not think that that's very much at all. But if you're coming along from the London Road, and we're talking about character here, the character of Hall Crescent is made up of 1930s to roughly 1960s buildings, of all 2-storey houses, semi-detached, some detached, some bungalows. The surrounding area around Common Hall Lane and Arcadian Gardens, Bereford, are all of that same type of housing. That is the character that we're looking at. To then build a 3-storey block of flats in the shape, in the design that we are looking at, which is slightly higher, slightly bigger, well, not slightly, quite a bit bigger, as we see on the overlay, quite a bit taller. When you actually approach Hall Crescent, it is not the same. Along the London Road, which is the row of houses that you saw that would be overlooked, they are also in the character of the 1930s type housing. That is what we're looking at. So is it harmful to the character of the area? Hall Crescent residents would say yes. If we're looking at whether it's attractive, your planning officer's report has already said the roof line is not attractive, it's unattractive. And it is one of the things that the developer and the applicant have really refused to budge on. So let's have a look at the reality of this. If we look at let's start with the overlooking and the obtrusiveness and the dominance. It really is a big building. And when you're faced with that, you're in your garden or in the London Road area.
Mr. Choi, sorry, you've been speaking for 3 minutes, which is permitted. If you could just sum up briefly.
Indeed, if I may be indulged with just one more minute.
Yep.
Then what we're looking at is, I do have a set of photos which I'm more than happy to show you what the actual views will be. In terms of car parking, 12 spaces in the way that is actually laid out on the parking area. One or two of those spaces is actually having to do more than a 3-point turn to actually get in and out. Is that really adequate parking? Is that really something? And if the residents themselves don't know how, can't park in those spaces, where will they park?
Mr. Choi, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Bradley, would you like to speak on behalf of the applicant, please? Thank you.
Good evening, councillors. My name's Ben Bradley and I'm the Director of Broadley Homes, the applicant for this project. Firstly, I'd like to say thank you for giving me the opportunity to address the committee this evening. In terms of my background, I'm a property developer and have been a long-term resident of Castle Point, having grown up in Hadleigh, living just off Scrub Lane. I've completed other developments in surrounding towns where I've delivered well-regarded homes which have contributed to the locales on account of their high quality and considered design. This is something that's personally very important to me. I want to develop properties I can look back on proudly. Over the past few months and utilising the council's pre-app advice service, I've taken on board the constructive feedback which I've received, and through a process of refinement and revision, we have arrived at a scheme that will be both respectful to its surroundings in terms of its appearance and compliant with local and national planning policy. As you will see from the presented plans, in terms of the building's design, I've chosen to use several different materials to create a high-end aesthetic for the exterior. Internally, the layouts have been well thought out to create good quality living space for future occupiers and somewhere they can make their home. I certainly appreciate that for local residents, the prospect of development can create an element of fear and uncertainty. In terms of parking provision, I've spoken with several property agents who all felt that, given the close locality to Hadleigh Town Centre and main bus station, this development would be popular with downsizers, divorcees and first-time buyers for whom a single parking space would more than meet their requirements. Indeed, a local case to point is 555 London Road in Hadleigh, where a majority of the flats were sold to divorcees and downsizers. The new residents were particularly attracted to the views across Salvation Army Fields, and I'm hopeful the views across Hadleigh Downs and allotments will attract a similar type of buyer. Should you be minded to approve my proposals, councillors, you should be aware that in the terms of construction itself, I will be personally hands-on with the project management of the development and will be the point of contact for any issues which local residents may have or be affected by in that regard. I can therefore assure you that it will be my overriding aim to minimise any disturbance for neighbours and ensure that they are affected as little as possible. I would hope this development could be an exemplar in this regard, and it is certainly in my interest that the project be completed in a timely manner. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Bradley. Before I move the recommendation, do members have any questions for the planning officer about this planning application? Please note that this is a member's opportunity to seek clarification from the planning officer on any matters that they are unclear of. Members should refrain from making statements about their views on the proposal, as these can be expressed in the debate section of the meeting. Councillor Thornton.
Thank you. Yes, I do have a few questions, if you didn't indulge me. This is a contentious proposal where the determination relies on the planning balance, and it measures the weight of the benefits against the harms. Can you please supply, for our benefit, in percentages, how you calculated the benefits against the harms, so we've got some kind of numerical balance?
Thank you, Councillor Thornton. Would either of you like to respond to that?
Thank you. Yes, I would. I suppose it sounds a bit simplistic in some ways, but when we're talking about planning balances, so I say the boost to housing supply of 10 additional dwellings would have a small yet not insignificant impact on the council's housing supply, and it would provide housing at a time of housing shortage, and it therefore carries substantial weight. So I don't tend to think in terms of percentages. If you'll, well, bear with me, what I do is I imagine a pair of scales, and a substantial weight is a big weight going on the side of the scales that's in favour. Then I've also pointed out the roof design was perhaps not, I would have liked to have done a little bit more with that. And I said that was a negative aspect, and I said it carried little weight. So literally in my mind, I'm putting a little small, 2-ounce weight on the other side of the scales. And then each consideration I would do that with. And it soon becomes obvious which way the scales are tipping, when you've got a very big weight on one side. So I don't sort of put percentages on them, as you say, but that is how you do a balancing exercise, as simple as that sounds.
I think it would be useful if we did have some kind of formula and some kind of numerical sort of, so that we can look at it, because all we've got is words at the moment.
Could I just stop? Could I just go round? I'll come back to you.
I haven't finished. I did say I'd got a number of questions.
Till we could, yeah. I've just given the other members an opportunity to speak.
Yeah.
I will come back to you, Councillor Thornton, yeah?
Okay.
Councillor Savage.
Some concerns were raised about the noise from the stacker units for adjacent properties. And I know when we went to the site visit, it was explained about the acoustics and the nature of the design of the motor drives, etc. I just think for the benefit of the ladies and gentlemen around the chamber here, that we share that information with them, because to satisfy ourselves that isn't going to produce any unnecessary harm by way of noise pollution to adjacent properties.
Thanks. To keep the noise from the car stacker from escaping, the applicant's proposing to enclose it like in a garage structure. So that's how because that would also be a concern of mine. We wouldn't want mechanical noise to be an issue for those living next door. That's the photo that shows like a brick-built surround. So if you can imagine a garage effectively would be containing the equipment, is how I'd imagine it.
Councillor Anderson.
Thank you, Chairman. I've never ever seen this kind of stacking project on properties in Castle Point before. I've never seen that before. And I just wonder if people are coming and going at different times of the day or night, how does that system work? You've got somebody in the top, you've got somebody in the bottom, going at different times. How does that system work properly, please?
So we've got a number of applications that have been granted permission for flats that elsewhere in Hadleigh that have been granted consent with vehicle parking stackers. I think it's 363 London Road in Hadleigh is one that I can think of off the top of my head. And there's another block of flats that I'm aware of in Hadleigh that have proposed them as well and we've granted permission for. So the general idea with them is that you will drive in sort of ground level, and then the car would be able to then sink down on a hydraulic lift into the ground, into a pit. That then opens up another set of tracks for you to drive your wheels onto for the car above. Now, if the car below wants to leave, there's sufficient headroom in the parking structure above that the car above can raise up out of the ground and the car can reverse back or drive out, and then vice versa. So it's not reliant on the vehicle on top being able to leave to allow the person underneath to leave.
Councillor Raycott.
Thank you, Chairman. I went down, I attended the site visit yesterday, and we went there about 11 o'clock we met. and I found it very difficult to find a parking space in that area. We did eventually find one. It's quite close to these buildings, but one of my concerns are that we normally reckon at least one parking space per flat. So if we've got 12 flats, we want a minimum of 12 parking spaces. Now we've got 4 on this stacking system, so there's another kind of 8. Just looking at the pictures here, I'm not quite sure how accurate they are, but there only appears to be 2 cars on drives. Possibly you might get 4, but you still haven't got enough parking spaces on the site for the 12 vehicles. So I was just curious, where do we expect any additional cars to be parked? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks. So we'll have a look at parking. Here's the 2 frontage spaces. Then 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and that's the stacking, the last one. So that's the 12. Was it that you couldn't count 12? Was that the issue, or that 12's not enough?
On the original drawing that I was looking at, you couldn't see the parking spaces behind it.
Okay. Does that clarify adequately?
It clarifies that there is sufficient for at least one vehicle.
Sorry, Councillor Ray, your microphone doesn't appear to be on.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I mean, now you've explained it, there is at least one parking space per flat, which I gather is normally our recommendation, isn't it, for flats? Right, thank you.
In a location such as this.
Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Anderson inadvertently asked my question with regards to the stacker, so I shall change the tack. I note that there are concerns regarding privacy and overlooking, which you kindly took us through, Keith. It might be useful for those members that didn't attend the site visit yesterday for you just to outline what's behind the building. You've talked about the sides of it, and indeed what's at the front, but what's to the rear of the building, please, Keith? Thank you.
Thanks. The building has, well, here's what's there now. This building to the rear is a clinic, so it's a healthcare services. So the proposed development here doesn't lead to any loss of residential privacy to the back. In all other respects, it complies fully with your residential design guidance document, which the council's adopted. There aren't any reasons why we feel it would lead to an unacceptable level of overlooking. But of course, I expect that will be discussed a bit more as we go along.
Thank you.
Councillor Thornton.
Thank you. I have got a couple of questions to ask. Yeah. Right. Officers acknowledge in their report that there's already existing parking issues in Hall Crescent and admit that there may be more instances where flat dwellers or visitors would add to these by seeking out parking in nearby streets. But officers justified this by conceding that they would only be joining others that are already causing the parking issues. This just adds to the existing issues in the area already acknowledged, with officers justifying the approval by saying these issues are not. Can the officer please highlight to the committee what evidence is relied on to support the claim? For example, what past studies into these existing issues, if any, have been included in the evaluation of the proposal? And the consultation response from Essex Highways states that it offers no objection to the proposal, providing certain conditions are met. One of those refers to the allocation of the 12 parking
Councillor
spaces.
Thornton, can we stick to questions, please? It's quite long-winded, and
Yeah,
I'm trying to accommodate everyone in the room.
Please let me finish to get to the question. I've done one. This is the next bit. One of those refers to the allocation of the 12 parking spaces, and that each parking space shall be provided with minimum dimensions in accordance with current parking standards in order to ensure adequate space for parking off the highway is provided. Does the officer report, however, confirm that the proposal does not meet this condition, as 33% of the parking spaces provided fall within the stacker structure, and these do not meet the council's minimum width requirement?
Thank you, Councillor Thornton.
Thank you for the question. The stacker is, we note that it doesn't provide a 2.9 metre wide parking space. It provides about 2.7. But a parking stacker is it's a more controlled situation, effectively. Because the structures are contained, there's like a central pillar as well. You wouldn't have haphazard parking like you might get in a supermarket car park, for instance. So while, yes, it isn't completely compliant in terms of the dimensions of the parking spaces, because it is a more managed and controlled situation, we don't feel that would prejudice the use of the car stacker to its maximum potential. The other point was about evidence relied upon for the parking situation in the area generally. Because we're not the parking experts, we defer to the Highway Authority on such matters. If we were considering refusing planning permission for not having enough parking, we would need the support of the County Highway Authority to say, yes, this development would have an unacceptable impact on the highway. Without that, refusing permission for not having enough parking would be quite a high-risk strategy, because we then wouldn't be able to provide evidence to substantiate that point when we got to an appeal situation. And then, of course, that brings with it all the attendant problems of, potential costs awards against the council, reputational damage to the council and that kind of thing. So whilst officers here haven't done parking studies, we defer to the experts on this kind of thing.
On the highways...
Councillor Thornton, might I just ask for the opportunity? Other people have got their hands up. I will come back to you, but just to let other people...
This is relevant to what the officer has just said, and I don't want to lose the momentum, please.
This will be the fourth question. I'm just trying to give everyone an opportunity to speak.
This is the question section.
Yeah.
Right, so you said that you refer to the Highways Authority. Have you had dialogue with the Highways Authority regarding the reduced parking according to their conditions that they wanted set in the parking stacker?
Yeah, I have spoken to the Highway Authority about parking stackers and how we deal with them, because they don't fit nicely into the 2.9 by 5.5 metre spaces. The Highway Authority tells me that they are in the process of reviewing the current parking standards, because they were adopted about 10 years ago, and they are going to look at parking stackers and how best to deal with them. The current position of the Highway Authority is they don't object to this parking stacker. They are going to update their guidance and parking standards in due course to reflect, because things have moved on since 2009. Parking standards have become more frequently used when you're looking to maximise the potential of a brownfield site such as this. They do need guidance to reflect them, and whilst we don't have it yet, we are reliant on the County Council to produce that for us. But the current position is the Highway Authority don't object to it.
Councillor Mountford.
Thank you, Chair. Hopefully my question's a little bit simpler. Still on parking. One space per unit, assuming they're all full, and there's debates on whether that could or could not happen. If someone comes round for a service vehicle, how and where does that vehicle, what's the consideration for parking? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Service vehicles, do you mean people's supermarket deliveries or having a fridge delivered and all that sort of thing? Well, the highway outside the site has several areas of double yellow lines which you're allowed to load and unload on. So, I guess that would provide the space for that sort of thing to take place.
Okay, just to clarify, so say there's someone coming to repair something or install something and they're going to be there longer than that period. What would be the consideration for that vehicle to park?
If I had a tradesman, if I lived in the flat and I had a tradesman coming to service the boiler, I would move my own car elsewhere so that my tradesman could park in my space. So.
Councillor Lillis.
Thank you, Chair. Keith, I think these stackers are all new, or new to all of us here in the chamber. But you mentioned, or Steve mentioned, that there are others that have been installed elsewhere in the borough, and I was just wondering how the dimensions on this application compare to those that have been installed elsewhere, if they're similar. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, we have had one at the rear of a development on London Road near Liddell, didn't we? You've got a bit of memory of that, I think.
So they compare pretty favourably to what's been proposed in this. It's the same company, like manufacturer, that's proposing them. They do come in different widths. And I believe there is a condition, I don't know which, off the top of my head, which number it is. There's a condition relating to the parking stackers that details are submitted to ensure that they're sort of the narrowest of them is not installed and that there is a decent width provided. We are waiting, whilst we've granted permission for them, we are also waiting for the ones that we have granted permission for to be installed so that we can go and we are in discussions with the developers to go and look at them as well so that we can see after the fact how they actually function and we can learn more about them.
Councillor Savage.
Again on parking, recognising the fact that this development proposes to move slightly forward from the adjacent two properties, are we happy that the two parking spaces at the front are adequate for larger vehicles? Where I'm coming from here is, will a vehicle parked in them two spaces encroach on that pavement, or is there adequate space to park a car cleanly at the front of that development?
The 5.5 metre parking depth is fairly generous. Most spaces in car parks are usually 2.5 by 5, and we have an extra half metre length on what we're asking for. So yeah, unless someone sort of decides to park something ridiculous there, then I don't think that vehicles should be overhanging the footway. If they did, then it's an enforcement issue for the Highway Authority, but we don't think it would come to that.
Councillor Mountford.
Thank you. Last one on parking for me. Is there any reason why you can't increase the parking space in the front for visitors? Thank you.
When we first started looking at this development, it had 4 parking spaces on the front. Now, we said that looked a bit too much in the street scene. It would have meant the front of the development being full up with cars. So we negotiated moving 2 of those spaces into the parking stacker to make the development more attractive on the front. So it's perfectly possible, you could grant planning permission and say, we want visitor parking on the site frontage. That's in your gift. My advice would be not to do that and to grant it as it is, because it's important to keep the street scene looking nice. But that's going to be your decision.
Can we see a picture of the street scene? Because it's often
so
people.
Do you want that one again?
Yeah. See a couple of houses along. It's parking all the way across. All the existing one is parking all the way along.
Yeah, and doesn't it look awful? We want to try and have something a bit more attractive.
Okay.
Are there any more questions? Councillor Thompson.
Can the officer confirm there's no affordable or social housing included in this?
Thank you, Councillor Thornton. Yeah, that is right. There's no social housing included. when we received the application, that was one of the first things we said to the applicant. They've submitted a viability assessment to us, which we had Essex County Council Place Services to review for us. And Essex County Council Place Services did agree with the contents of the report that they can't viably provide affordable housing. But we managed to negotiate for the applicant to still pay their contribution to improve the local healthcare facilities, because it was the NHS consultee commented to us that healthcare facilities shouldn't be further overburdened. And the applicants also agreed to pay the contribution for the recreational disturbance on the coast. The healthcare contribution is 5,800, but that's indexed back to January 2022, and inflation's been high since then, so that may well have gone up a bit.
Are there any more questions? Thank you, councillors. Following the questions to the planning officer, the planning officer's recommendation is that planning permission is granted subject to the applicant entering into an agreement under Section 106 of the Town and Country Planning Act 1990, as detailed in the report, and conditions also set out in the report. For the purposes of debate, I move the recommendation. Please note that members should only speak once during the debate section, and you have a maximum of 4 minutes. Who would like to speak first? Councillor Skipp.
Thank you, Chairman. I mean, normally this is the type of application I would be supporting because it is in a brownfield site, and we need to maximise that type of development to save more precious sites elsewhere. However, once again, we've got an application comes through now which falls well deficient of the adopted Essex parking standards that we've been asked to approve again here, and this is on its own over 14 spaces deficient from what it should have, which should have 26, only got 12. As Councillor got said earlier on, we visited the site yesterday. I had to park a significant distance away from the site if I could find a reasonable parking space that wasn't inconvenience anybody else. And this will be a big issue, I think, for people trying to visit friends who live there, or even for the residents who live there. We can't rely on them all using public transport. It sounds good in reality, on paper. It wouldn't happen in reality. So for that reason, really, I don't think I can support this application on this occasion. Although I do support the idea of developing sites like this and maximising them. Because of the deficiency in parking spaces, I can't support this application today. Sorry.
Thank you, Councillor Skipp. Councillor Murray.
I'd like to agree with what Councillor Skipp has said. I also agree with the principle of developing on brownfield sites, but they are precious in themselves because we need to meet our housing need, and we have a substantial need for genuinely affordable and social housing. If it's going to market housing, we're just bringing more people from outside of the borough in because our own people can't afford to buy what's available here. And that's just going to add to the infrastructure. The parking is another issue. The parking, once again, we're going below our own parking standards. And for those reasons, I can't support the application.
Thank you, Councillor Thornton. Councillor Mountford.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to share some information with the committee that Stephen Garner shared with me regarding some previous applications over the last 3 years. On 16 applications, 75 units, there's been an average of 1.1 spaces per flat. You can't do 1.1. So if you realistically look at the precedent that's been set by the DMC over the last 16 applications, 1.1 parking spaces has been allocated to similar applications. Some have had none, some have had 0.6. So if we're setting a precedent and trying to set something new up, one space is exactly what we've been doing for the last 3 years. Obviously, I've not been on here, and I'm trying to look at how we can be consistent. And 1.1 is what we've been doing.
Councillor Savage.
I probably won't make myself popular with residents when I say this, but we are in a debate situation and we have to be realistic. And to those residents, I will say this. If this application is turned down, we will end up in exactly the same position we ended up with the flats on Benfleet that have just been passed by the Planning Inspectorate, because whilst parking is a consideration materially, it doesn't hold enough weight to stop a development like this, and we do need to utilise the brownfield sites as we are. And the reality of life is that if we turn this down purely on parking, just like Cunnybrook's going to get turned over, just like Benfleet High Road got turned over, the inspectorate will turn it over and cost our residents money by way of council tax payments in terms of legal costs. That will be built. And I think we've got to be honest to ourselves and to our residents, because we can turn this down and they go home and have a nice dinner and feel all comfortable, and then in 6 months' time or a year's time, they get built. And that's where we are. And unfortunately, we're in a position, because of the history of Castle Point in terms of planning, we've got about a 1.8 year land supply when the government stipulates that we've got to have 5 years of land supply. Ultimately, we are where we are. You know, I don't want to be all comfortable and touchy-feely and promise these guys something that we can't deliver. And ultimately, they will get built. Parking is not substantial reason enough in planning law to stop that application going forward.
Thank you, Councillor Savage. Can I just say to the members of the public, we've heard a few obscenities mentioned. That's not appropriate at all. Can you please refrain from using such language? Yeah, it is audible around the chamber. Thank you very much. Would anyone else like to speak? Councillor Lillis.
Thank you, Chair. I have to say I agree with my colleagues. We are where we are, and Councillor Savage calls it as it is. We're in desperate need for small dwellings in our borough, and I'm not sure about a precedent being set over 3 years. I think a precedent of one parking space for one flat has been implemented within our borough for many a year, maybe decades. So whilst I am sympathetic to the issues that the residents raise, I think on balance, I'm in favour of the application. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lillis. Councillor Anderson.
Thank you, Chairman. I've listened to the presentation done by the gentleman, one of the gentlemen that's sitting behind me there, and he's pointed out quite clearly that this is out of character. This is out of character with the street scene, and it can be turned down on that. There is a problem with parking, and I can see the parking drifting onto the main road, and I'm sure there will be parking problems there. And I also have a problem with the stacker system sizes too small, and I will therefore be voting against this application.
Thank you, Councillor Anderson. Would anyone else like to speak? Thank you. Members, the motion before you is for approval. May I have a show of hands, please? Those for the motion.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, Chairman.
Thank you. Those against the motion?
1, 2, 3.
And there are no abstentions. The application is approved. Item 2 is 179 Kiln Road, Thundersley.
Excuse me, are we allowed to say anything now that it's finished?
No, you are not permitted to speak. You don't take any part in this meeting because that's the rules of this chamber. I don't need to answer that question. You are not permitted to speak. You're not permitted to speak.
And I would like to know who those councillors are.
Alan, thank you. Thank.
Do you just want to tell me?
These things happen, folks. Apologies for that. Let's proceed. Item 2 is 179 Kiln Road, Thundersley, and I will now hand over to the planning officer to present this item.
Thank you very much, Chairman. So this application is being presented to the Development Management Committee at the request of Councillor Jackie Thornton after a successful call-in bid due to the impact of the proposal on the residential amenity of neighbouring properties due to pollution. This application itself is slightly different from the normal type of planning application that we would bring to committee. It is a variation of condition application, which is a type of application which seeks to amend a condition previously imposed on a site. When considering these types of applications, it is only the specific conditions that are proposed to be amended that can be considered and are the subject matter of the application. I'd also like to point out that whilst the next item on the agenda following this is also about the same site, we must consider this application on its own merits and on its own and not consider it in relation to the application that will follow this. So to provide a bit of context for the site, the Shell Garage is located just down the road from the council offices, located between just before you get to Kingston Road, which is the entrance to the new Ashcroft housing estate, and just after Wensley Road here, and opposite Glenmere Park Avenue here, and it extends to the back to a piece of land to the rear, which is currently vacant but has planning permission to build 9 dwellings on, and that has commenced. So if we look at the site here, you can see the existing petrol station forecourt and shop here with mechanical car wash. And you've got the street view seen here, which you see if you drive by. So, by way of a bit of context, in 2005, permission was sought and approved at the site for the redevelopment of the existing petrol station. And condition 6 of this permission, which is up on your screen now, approved the operating hours of the filling station to be between 6 a.m. Monday to Friday, to open 6 a.m. Monday to Friday, 7 a.m. on Saturdays, and 8 a.m. on Sundays, with a closing time of 11:30 p.m. on all of those days. Condition 7 of the permission restricted the operating times of the shop, car wash, car vacuum, and the air water dispenser, and permitted them to start operating at 6 a.m. Monday to Friday, 7 a.m. on Saturdays, and 8 a.m. on Sundays, with a closing time of 10 p.m. On all of those days. So, prior to this that application in 2005, there were no imposed time limits on the operation of the filling station under planning regulations. And this proposal seeks to extend the operational times of both the petrol filling station and the on-site shop from 6 a.m. As it is during the week to 11:30 p.m. On weekends as well as during the week. To match the current weekday operating times. This means that it will be opening an hour earlier the forecourt will be operational an hour earlier on a Saturday and 2 hours earlier on a Sunday, and the closing of the shop will be an hour and a half later on Saturdays and Sundays as well. So the main issue to address in this instance is the impact of the earlier morning and late evening opening times on the amenity of adjacent properties and residents. So, in support of this application, a noise impact assessment was submitted, and originally this item was slated to be presented to the committee at the last meeting. However, at the last minute, it was brought to our attention that the noise impact assessment may not have taken into account fully the dwellings to the rear of the site which had permission, and currently a commencement has been made on that. So, We postponed it to bring it to you this evening, and an updated noise impact assessment has been undertaken where it's been confirmed that this noise impact assessment does take into account the dwellings that are yet to be built and that it is acceptable. The noise impact assessment that's been submitted modelled expected visits over the course of an hour and condensed those down into a 15-minute window to provide a worst-case scenario, and then compared these to the quietest recorded measurements. And it found that these would be in line with existing ambient background noise, mostly from traffic on Kiln Road. So whilst officers recognise that noise from vehicle doors and people attending the site later in the evenings on Saturdays and Sundays may result in some slight disturbance to residents, Environmental Health have confirmed officers' opinions that the noise impacts assessment that's been undertaken adequately demonstrates that the extended hours would not result in a significant noise impact. On this basis, no objection to the proposal has been raised by officers, and consequently the application is recommended for approval to permit the operating hours of the forecourt to be extended at weekends to match the weekday operating hours and allow the shop to operate during the same time period. I'll hand back to you, Chairman.
Thank you, Stephen. Mr. Thorns, would you like to make your statement, please, if you could just come up to the lectern? And just to remind you, if you've been sitting there this evening, you have 3 minutes. Thank you very much.
So, hello, my name is Angus Thorns. I'm a director of the company which owns land directly to the north of Shell Garage. I've also been asked to speak on behalf of Mr. and Mrs. Shrimplin, who live in the house immediately to the west. Back in 2005, on the redevelopment of the site, the then council officers rightly saw fit to recommend a restriction on trading hours in the expectation that the increased traffic flows would create, at unsocial hours, a disturbance to adjoining residential owners. This has not changed, and why should those unsocial hours be changed merely to accommodate a more intensive use of the site? The application under consideration, in effect, now acknowledges that increase in traffic flows, but we all know that in predominantly residential areas, unsocial hours remain the same wherever you are, and thus the need to impose a restriction on trading hours to protect unnecessary disturbance. No meaningful justification has been given to support why those unsocial hours should be curtailed, but rather that trading hours should be extended to permit more profitable trading. Hepworth Acoustics have produced a report which specifically restricts itself to sound based on the British Standard 4142. That standard only concerns itself with the measure of sound. However, the local plan concerns itself with uses which can cause particular conflict with residential amenity by virtue of traffic generation, noise, fumes and other forms of disturbance. Therefore, both an intensification in use and extension in hours is especially important where increased non-residential uses are in close proximity to the residential. Mr. and Mrs. Shrimpling at 171 Kiln Road have resided next to this garage for very many years and strongly oppose this application. They have suffered ever-increasing disturbance from on-site traffic movements. Motorcycle and moped groups now regularly meet at the site at weekends, and despite barely visible signage requesting patrons to respect neighbours, this is ignored and certainly not enforced. We all know the disturbance motorbikes can make with the constant revving of engines, and this mainly comes at the weekends, Southend seafront acting as a magnet. So any early opening hours will cause a much greater disturbance to neighbours, especially on Sundays. Although it may sound petty, there is a public address system used by staff members, the volume of which can be particularly annoying, and more so if allowed during any extended hours. A wake-up call at 6 in the morning is not something you should either expect or accept. We oppose the application, and thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Thorns. Mr. Marm, would you like to speak? Just to remind you, you have 3 minutes. Thank you.
Very much.
Thank you very much, Council, for the opportunity to speak this evening. I'm John Marn. I'm speaking on behalf of MFG, who own the Shell garage there. Our number one priority as a business is our consumers and how we serve the community. And our application is to serve the community for an additional 3 hours per week. As already alluded to standardise our trading hours at the weekend to reflect those we serve our community for the other 5 days of the week. We have given, as part of this application, consideration has been given to the impact of noise on neighbours, which is why we have sought to extend the shop hours to 11 o'clock, because bringing customers into the actual shop rather than serving through a night hatch will reduce the noise impact on the customer or on the surrounding residents, late at night, as the customers will be in the site having the conversation with the cashier. In terms of the tannoy system alluded to, it's actually there as a health and safety mechanism for the cashier. It's only used if there is an incident that requires instruction to people filling up the pumps. Obviously, what we are serving is a highly explosive product, and safety of our customers and the surrounding areas is of paramount importance to us. We acquired the site in May, and since May we've had no recorded customer complaints for early morning or late night trading, and we do take this kind of thing very seriously. We obviously engage with the Hepworth for the noise impact assessment, because we wouldn't want to be progressing an application that has an adverse impact on the local residents. We absolutely respect the views of our neighbours, and if there's anything we can do, happy to look at better signage for our customers to respect the neighbours as they leave the sites. No problem at all, and would happily work with them if there's any other concerns that we can practically address. So we'd like to thank you all for your time this evening in considering our application as a committee, and also for the Planning Department and the Environmental Health for their consideration of our application. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Marn. Before I move the recommendation to members, do we have any questions for the Planning Officer about this planning application? Councillor Savage.
Can I ask, in terms of the pollution we're talking about, are we talking about light pollution, noise pollution, as well as environmental pollution from emissions, or is it one or other or all, if you don't know?
So policy EC3 covers a range of different, it's grouped under pollution, so it covers noise, disturbance to residential community, light, fumes, traffic disturbance. It covers a whole range of different aspects of different types of pollution.
Councillor Thornton.
Thank you. Can you explain with a bit more clarity what changed between when the condition was put on and now when we see that it's okay to go further?
So back in 2005, the application applied for those hours that it currently is, and there was no objection to it at the current moment, at that point in time. They've now applied to vary those hours, and again, officers in consultation with environmental health have reached, and from the outcome of the noise impact assessment, have come to the conclusion that there's no additional harm caused.
Councillor Thompson.
The dialogue that we've had earlier on, there has been complaints to environmental health. And you've confirmed, I believe, that you are not privy to those with regards to noise. Is that correct?
So when you requested earlier, I don't have access to the environmental health record keeping system, so I cannot look at their complaints. However, environmental health have commented on this application and have raised no objection, and obviously they would be aware of their own complaints on their own systems.
Councillor Mountford.
Thank you. Just following on from that, it doesn't seem like then we're getting the whole picture. We've been told by our colleague that there haven't been any complaints, but that can't be substantiated at this time, can it, from environmental health? Because we have spoke to and heard from residents on verbal and written communications, and that would completely contradict what's been said.
So I believe what the applicant was from the company was saying was that they've received corporately to themselves no complaints. Environmental health, however, I believe I've been copied into an email of with a recent reference number about a complaint. I don't know the outcome of that. However, as I've said to Councillor Thornton, the noise impact assessment has been assessed and found that there are no measurable impacts of the proposal, and the models, the noise impact assessment models, that it won't be any worse than existing ambient background noise from Kiln Road.
Councillor Aycock.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not quite sure if this is a typing error in the report, but you're saying in the second line down of the report that the shop is open from 7 o'clock in the morning to 11:30, I presume on general Monday to Friday. Then you've got Saturday from 8 o'clock to 11:30, which is understandable. But you've got Sunday at 6 o'clock in the morning to 11:30. Is that a typing error that you open an hour? It's opened an hour earlier on a Sunday morning than the rest of the week?
Yes, thank you very much for pointing out. I apologise, that is a typing error. It should say the existing opening hours on a Monday to Friday are 6 o'clock in the morning till 11:30 in the evening, and it's proposed to match those times on Saturdays and Sundays. The conditions later in the report do specify that, but I will admit that that is a typographical error, so apologies for that.
Yeah, thank you. Could I just a further point, Mr. Chairman? The gentleman who spoke to us, he spoke about the hatch. Does that mean that often that these times are the shop opening hours? Does that mean that often the hatch is open after those hours of the shop closing?
So
Do
currently,
you understand what I'm getting at?
So
Yeah,
currently the petrol forecourt operating hours are longer than the shop opening hours, and they're not self-service pumps, so it requires that someone is there to take payment for when someone pays for needs to pay for fuel. And so what happens is during, I think it's about an hour and a half in the evenings when the shop is closed, they go to the night hatch where there's a member of staff, and they stand outside and will take a payment through sort of like a hatch, and speak to the member of staff there, and who will take their payment.
I understand that, but is that an extra hour and a half on top of the hours what the shop itself, the front door of the door of the shop is open? I don't know if you follow what I'm.
Yeah, so the shop currently shuts at 10 p.m. and the petrol on a weekday, and the petrol forecourt stays open until 11:30 p.m. So the night hatch is open for that window to take payments during that period of time.
Councillor Thornton.
Am I right in my assumption then that when planning permission is granted, conditions may be applied, and enforcement on those conditions is a planning matter, but anything that happens outside of that goes to environmental health, and there is no dialogue between the two? So basically, once permission is granted, it's no longer a planning matter unless it's part of a condition. So any ramifications are other departments.
So when it comes to statutory noise and light nuisances, if there's no condition, environmental health involved, although they quite often will come and speak to us and see if there's any planning history on the site to see whether there are any conditions. Where there are conditions, we liaise quite closely with environmental health to make sure that those conditions are being adhered to, and whether it's best, whether there's a breach of a condition or whether there's a breach of law. It's one of those sort of grey areas where there's a bit of overlap between what environmental health do and a bit of overlap between the conditions that they recommend we put on conditions. But if there is a condition that's being breached in planning with environmental health assistance for things like noise and light pollution, we'll take action on those.
If it's not part of the condition, you would be oblivious to
You have to put your microphone on. Sorry.
You would be oblivious to any complaints that are going on if it's not part of a condition.
Yes, unless they're copied into the planning department, we wouldn't have any knowledge of those.
Councillor Mountford.
Thank you. Sorry, just for the sake of clarity, Stephen, could we can we just clarify the opening times of the actual operation and the shop? It isn't quite clear there if it's 10 or 11:30.
No, apologies. It's that first line. If you ignore that first paragraph, I admit that is wrong and a typographical error. So on page 18, it lists the existing condition that was permitted under the 2005 permission, which is 6 a.m. till 11:30 p.m. So, sorry, this is the petrol filling to the forecourt. 6 a.m. till 11:30 p.m. Monday to Fridays, 7 a.m. till 11:30 p.m. on Saturdays, and 8 a.m. till 11:30 p.m. on Sundays. And then the shop, car wash, car vacuum, and air water tower were allowed to open from 6 a.m. till 10 p.m. Mondays to Fridays, so an hour and a half, had to shut an hour and a half before the petrol forecourt. 7 a.m. till 10 p.m. on Saturdays, and then 8 a.m. till 10 p.m. on Sundays. And I would just note, I've just remembered here that with the variation to condition 7, it's only proposed that the shop operating hours will change, not the car wash, car vacuum and air water tower. It's just the shop.
And then can I just clarify, therefore, for the remaining time after 10 p.m, people can only buy petrol, or can they still buy things from the shop through the hatch?
I'm not aware of
There's
whether
no
they're allowed
stipulation.
to. I'm not aware of that, no.
Okay.
Councillor Savage.
I won't be too offended by the comments about motorcycles, being a motorcyclist myself, about the petrol station. But I will say this: I'm on the flight path for the EasyJet flight that comes out when it's flying to the west, and that wakes me up at 6 o'clock every morning. And if he's flying out to the east, a guy who lives around the corner who's got an Harley Davidson wakes me up at 6 o'clock in the morning. Now, coming from my background in health, safety, and environment, the health part of it in terms of noise assessments are really difficult. And where I'm getting to with this is that if I rev my bike up pulling out of that petrol station, it's going to make a lot of noise.
Is this a question?
It is a question. It is a question. In terms of the noise assessment that you've done, are you just looking for a baseline, or are you looking at peaks? Because if I pull out there on my bike, which meets all the British and European standards, it will wake them residents up. There's no doubt about it. So I have an issue with this. I wholeheartedly agree with Councillor Thornton in terms of the noise element, of noise pollution, because it don't bode well with me, this, for the local residents.
So the question was about levels.
Yeah, are these noise levels in terms of decibels a baseline, or do they measure peaks as well?
Thank you.
Just bear with me a second. I've got the noise report here in front of me. Insofar as the noise report is concerned, I am not a noise specialist, and that's why we defer to the knowledge of environmental health and any consultants they may use, because they are the noise specialists. I don't know off the top of my head whether it's looking at peaks. I do know that the assessment was undertaken that monitored background noise levels and noise levels that were emitted from the site and surrounding area for a period of time. Environment from beyond that, I can't answer questions about specific peaks, but all I can say is that environmental health haven't raised any objections to it.
Are there any other questions? The Planning Officer's recommendation is that planning permission be granted subject to the conditions as set out in the report. For the purposes of debate, I move the recommendation. Who would like to speak first? Savage.
As I previously said just now, it doesn't bode well with me, this. The station has been there a long time. People have bought houses adjacent to a petrol station, and that comes with a certain, a bit like buying a house next to a school, I suppose. But nonetheless, I do think as a council we have a duty of care you know, making sure that those residents don't get waken up at ungodly hours or can't go to bed early enough at night and getting woken up by motorbikes or whatever kind of noise comes out of that station. So I'm not too impressed with that. The other stations that were quoted locally aren't so close to local housing. I mean, the BP garage that's mentioned in the report is away from residential areas. The other Shell garage, I believe, down at Benfleet, not too far from myself, is shut in that time of the morning. So, you know, I can't find anything particularly favourable about this application, to be fair.
Thank you, Councillor. Would anyone else like to speak? Members, the motion before you is for approval. May I have a show of hands, please? Those for the motion. Those against the motion.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
There were no abstentions. The application is refused.
No.
We are not refusing it. No,
No.
we aren't.
Sorry,
Apologies.
Chair, you just have not approved it.
We haven't approved it,
now
so we
what
need
needs
an
to happen
alternative motion.
Is a member of the committee needs to put an alternative motion that needs to be seconded, and that motion must have material reasons to change the material planning reasons to change the recommendation.
Would someone like to propose an amended motion? Councillor Thornton.
I propose that we refuse because it's to the detriment of the material, of the amenity of the residents.
Would anyone like to second that? Seconded, Councillor Savage. Yep. Stephen?
On the basis that we do not have any objection from environmental health, and as far as I'm aware, no one in this room is a qualified noise expert, there is no material planning reason to object to the proposal on the basis of harm by reason of noise to adjacent residents when there is no supporting evidence from professionals about this.
So we shall vote on this now.
Well, Stephen's advising you that you're advising it's not material, so it's not.
Would someone like to come up with an alternative?
Sorry, Chair. If I may, if the planning officer is advising that that is not a legitimate material planning reason, you don't have a legitimate planning reason to refuse the application. Therefore, you need to come up with another material.
Yes, we need. Yep. Would someone like to suggest an alternative motion with a material planning? Councillor Thornton.
Can I just ask, the fact that we haven't got all of the information from environmental health, does that not have any bearing on it?
So those are complaints that are made under environmental health statutory noise nuisance legislation. Environmental health, I would say, they are aware of those complaints on their own system when they were making comments on the application. And so therefore, when they were making their recommendation, they would have been aware of those while making their recommendation, which was that they didn't object to the proposal.
So we still need an alternative motion based upon a material planning reason. Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Chair. Forgive my ignorance. Could this not be deferred until such report is presented? Is that not something that the officers would consider? Thank you.
What additional information is it that you're seeking, specifically?
The report from environmental health.
About the noise complaints?
Agreed.
So specifically from environmental health, so you would want a record? I mean, just as an example, earlier today I provided a record to Councillor Thornton of the complaints we had received about in the planning department about it, and I provided a response in relation to when we received the complaint, the nature of the complaint and the outcome of the investigation. Is that the sort of thing that be looking to seek from environmental health?
In response to that, I had an example of one complaint that had been made direct to environmental health that was ongoing, I believe. We've got no idea how many others there are. So can we not investigate and ask environmental health to come forward with all the complaints they've had over a period of time?
On that basis, then, I think that we can defer the item if we're going to request a record from environmental health of the complaints they've received over time. Can I just request an idea of what sort of time frame? I mean, obviously not the last couple of months, but how many years be seeking to go back for that report record?
I think anything that is reasonable, that doesn't take an inordinate amount of time, whatever the system can provide, and then perhaps that could be circulated to members if that's permissible before the next meeting, so then you can gauge if that is a reasonable amount of data to base an informed decision.
So would the general consensus be to go for a deferral on that basis, awaiting reports from environmental health? Yep. Would someone like to move that as an alternative motion? Councillor Lillis, and second.
If I could move that. Sorry, Mr. Chairman, I would like to ask another point regarding environmental health.
I'll permit that, yeah.
Is the information environmental health has given you, is that just on complaints what they have received, or have they actually been down at the garage and done a 24-hour or so many days kind of sound check, so they have a record of the amount of noise or the level of the noise coming from that garage? Right, thank you, Chairman.
So I haven't been provided, other than an email that I've been copied into regarding a recent noise complaint, I've not been given any further information about the nature or frequency or investigations that have been taken place. So the comments that they provided as part of this application are solely in relation to this application and the noise impact assessment. So I don't know what their investigations are.
Sorry, at present we're looking at a motion to support a deferral awaiting reports of complaints. Did you want to be, it's already been proposed by Councillor Lillis, it hasn't been seconded yet. Did you want to say something?
Can I just mention also, the evaluation of the proposal, it says in the second paragraph, paragraph 185A of the National Planning Policy Framework states, planning policies and decisions should mitigate and reduce to a minimum potential adverse impact resulting from noise from new developments. Now, it's not a new development in the truest sense of the word, because it's already an existing building, but it's a new proposal on that development. Now, for me, the National Planning Policy Framework is quite clear in that section 185A. You know, it is our responsibility to mitigate and reduce to a minimum. I don't think opening them hours earlier satisfies that requirement. So is that not a material reason also? So it's a secondary reason for not deferring it, for actually refusing it.
I think we are looking at the moment for a motion to defer pending reports, because a refusal doesn't seem to have any material planning considerations.
But excuse me, I need some clarity from the officers, but that to me is quite black and white. You know, that paragraph alone there.
Sorry. So it's on the basis that it's not materially supported by environmental health. Environmental health have taken into consideration the impact on the noise impact assessment and found that there is no adverse harm to living conditions as a result of that. So that is why I'm saying that it's not a sustainable reason. Even though I admit it does say that in the NPPF, however, the response from environmental health is that's and which I agree with, is that there isn't any identified harm.
I'll second the motion for deferral.
Right, can we just have a vote on the motion?
Yep, so you are voting to defer a decision on this application, awaiting further a report from environmental health on the noise complaints, is that right?
Yes. and that's been forwarded by proposed by Councillor Liz and seconded by Councillor Savage. Yeah?
Councillor Mountford.
Councillor Mountford.
Yes. So now the committee need to vote.
We need to vote on that proposal, and that is to support the deferral pending these reports. Would you motion? Show of hands for the motion. I think that's unanimous. Yeah. Yep. Okay. I'm just going to have a drink of.
Yeah, sure.
Item 3 is Benfleet Service Station, 175 to 179 Kiln Road. Just to remind, this is a separate application from the last one. And I'll now hand over to the Planning Officer to present this item.
Thank you, Chairman. So this application is again presented to committee following a successful call-in by Councillor Jackie Thornton due to concerns about the impact of the proposal on the residential amenity of neighbouring properties due to pollution and eroding the natural environment. This application is a full application, so unlike the previous one, all aspects of the proposal can be considered. However, the usage of the existing petrol station, forecourt and shop does not form part of this application. So to provide a bit of context, you all know where the site is, seeing as we've just been talking about it, but the part of the site that is specifically being referred to this evening is under this application is this section of the site here, where the existing mechanical car wash is and the existing entrance way to the site is. And you can see it here, you've got the existing mechanical car wash, vehicle access to the car wash and to the petrol pumps. So permission is being sought to demolish the existing mechanical car wash at the site and install 6 electric vehicle charging points, parking bays and a canopy along the western side of the site here. So you've got each of the 6 electric vehicle charging points along with 6 parking spaces and a small canopy overhanging the front. And then there's proposed to replace the mechanical car wash with 3 jet wash bays towards the north of the site, and along with a new tyre and air pressure and water machine here, and a new electrical substation and enclosure here, along with a small mechanical plant room for the jet washers. So turning to each of those in turn, this provides a little bit more information about what each of the electric vehicle charging points would look like, along with the style of canopy that is proposed. This is a CGI that we've been provided by the applicant to show what this sort of canopy may look like in reality. Turning to the next one, this is an example of the small substation enclosure to the rear of the site. It's very similar to other sort of what you might see at other petrol stations and forecourts and other residential areas. You've got 3 jet wash bays proposed here, and the 2 furthest to the west are also proposed to have a canopy over the top of them. And again, this is a photograph showing something similar at another site. This is a photograph and a drawing of the air and water machine, which would be being provided as part of the proposal. And then this is a small plant room which should be provided for the to serve the jet wash bays. And then just to show you, so that canopy would run along this boundary here with the parking spaces in front of it. You've got the you've got the substation here, small plant room, jet wash bays here, and then the combo unit for the air and water and vacuum here. And just as by way of a little bit of local context, these are the Shell garage on the other side of Rayleigh Weir, who have just reopened their new facilities. So the canopy is different in this instance from what is being proposed here. This is a taller canopy. However, the electric vehicle charging points that they've got are very, very similar to what's proposed as part of this proposal. So the principle of the development is considered acceptable to officers, as the site already represents a mixed use as a petrol station, car wash and shop within a residential area. This wouldn't be changing as a result of the proposal, and the proposal would support the use of electric vehicles in the borough, improving the existing public charging infrastructure. The impact of the proposal on noise generation has been raised as a concern, and detailed noise impact assessment has again been undertaken and taken into account all noise-sensitive receptors close to the site. Monitoring of the existing noise levels has also been undertaken, and a worst-case scenario modelled for the proposed development to ascertain any harm that might arise. The assessment's concluded that from the proposal it is anticipated that there would be between no observed effect and a lowest observed effect, which are below the representative background noise levels. The report concluded that the sound generated by the development would be largely unnoticeable or just perceptible during the most noise-sensitive periods of the assessment. As part of this application, this is on the left here is an extract drawing from the submitted noise impact assessment, and on the right here is the proposed development to the north of the site, and you can see here that they're represented. As part of the assessment, officers have noted that this drawing here overlays the plans incorrectly on the OS map. You can see here that the electric vehicle charging points are slightly over the access road here, and these project slightly further to the north. However, on clarification with Environmental Health have undertaken their assessment regardless of this and taking into account that this drawing is inaccurate, and they've not based their decision on this. So I just wanted to raise that whilst that drawing depicts it slightly inaccurately, depicts the jet wash bays and these the electric vehicle charging points as being closer to dwellings than they are actually going to be, that Environmental Health have taken that into consideration and it's not affected their decision. So as part of the application, Environmental Health have raised no objection to the proposal on the basis of noise or disturbance to the amenity of neighbours. A condition has been proposed to secure that noise levels do not exceed existing background noise thresholds for the substation and plant room equipment, which is considered to be suitable to prevent harm to residential amenity. Another condition has been recommended to limit the hours of use of the jet wash bays to ensure occupants of the nearest noise-sensitive receptors, so the nearest houses, are not adversely impacted. The proposed condition would limit the jet wash bays from 8 o'clock in the morning till 6 o'clock in the evening on Mondays to Saturdays, and 9 o'clock in the morning till 6 o'clock in the evening on Sundays and bank holidays. This is in fact less than the existing mechanical car wash, which is permitted to operate from 6 a.m. in the morning till 10 o'clock at night, Monday to Fridays, 7 in the morning till 10 o'clock at night on Saturdays, and 8 o'clock in the morning till 10 o'clock at night on Sundays. This means that the jet wash bays would actually be used for less periods of time than the mechanical car wash. The proposal does result in the loss of some vegetation to the rear of the site, located here. The remainder of the trees here, along with a large oak tree, which is located in the site to the north, are proposed to be retained, and root protection barriers are proposed to be put in place to protect the roots of the trees that are being retained. And those trees that are being removed as a result of this are considered to be of a low quality and not worthy of being retained. And I would also confirm that they wouldn't be worthy of issuing a tree preservation order on to protect them either. At the time of publishing the agenda, we had not received a response from the Essex Badger Protection Group, but we were aware of badger sets on the site, on the development site to the north, and therefore, as part of the agenda, conditions 7 and 8 were proposed to require a badger survey to be undertaken prior to commencement and to provide badger ramps. Between publishing the agenda and this evening, we've received a response from the Essex Badger Protection Group, who have raised no objections subject to conditions which were largely similar to what was being proposed by officers. However, as you see before you on the late letter schedule, we've incorporated a number of tweaks to our originally suggested conditions following the feedback from the Essex Badger Protection Group. And so taking those into account, we think that there is no issues in relation to badgers or other protected species on the site. Overall, the proposal is considered to provide a benefit in terms of providing improved infrastructure for EV charging, and the proposed jet wash bays would be used for a lesser period of time than the current mechanical car wash. it has been found not to have an unacceptable impact on neighbours' amenity, and whilst there would be some loss of biodiversity, it's not considered that this minor consideration provides a sufficiently robust or sustainable reason to object and refuse. Therefore, officers raise no objection to the proposal, and it is recommended before you that the application be approved, subject to the amended conditions as contained within the late letter schedule before you this evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Mr. Thorns, would you like to speak? Just to remind you, I'm sure you're quite aware you have 3 minutes. Thank you very much.
Okay. Yes, I'm the director of the company that owns the land directly to the north. This application involves two aspects. The first, a fundamental change to the local plan designation of the land, then followed by the introduction of an extended, noisy commercial activity into an
Mr.
otherwise
Thorns, sorry,
residential
Mr. Thorns,
area.
could I just stop you there? Can you stay to the present proposal because you're referring to the previous proposal?
Sorry, I can't hear. I've got bad hearing. Sorry.
Can you stay to the present proposal? We've already dealt with the previous one regarding you're overlapping a little bit.
Sorry.
You're overlapping slightly in terms of what you've already said.
I can't hear. Sorry.
There are two separate proposals. We've already dealt with the second proposal, yes?
Yeah,
this is number 3.
Application 453. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Wasn't I relevant to that then? Is it?
You were talking about stuff that you'd already covered in the second proposal. Yes.
Oh, didn't think
Yes.
so.
Okay, continue. But yeah.
Sorry, it's, Right, excuse me there, sorry.
Apologies, please continue.
Right, this planning application involves two aspects. The first of a fundamental change to the local designation of the land, then followed by the introduction of an extended, noisy commercial activity onto an otherwise residential area with the high-pressure jet wash plant room, only 1.4 metres from a new dwelling on our land. 1.4 metres, in fact, is less than the distance between that wall and the front of the bench there. We are told the sound generated by that and the 3 car washes will not cause any disturbance to adjoining residential occupiers, so as to fall foul of local plan policies EC3 and EC4. I don't believe it. 1. As the Local Government Association says in its guidance to planning officers, if the officer's recommendation is contrary to the local development plan, then the considerations to justify the departure must be compelling and fully clearly stated, or otherwise open itself to a judicial review. 2. In his report, the officer omits reference to H5 of the local plan, which is specifically relevant to the land, the subject of this planning application, which I will call the buffer strip. Not only was it included in an area safeguarding long-term housing needs, but specifically dictated that, I quote, valuable landscape and wildlife features will be protected. The land forms a buffer to the residential housing to the north and thus clearly serves that purpose. Just because the buffer strip may be unsuitable for an individual dwelling, it still serves the purpose dictated by the local plan, much as the woodland and open spaces do on modern housing estates. When the buffer strip was last considered by the Planning Committee in 2018, the council officers were very concerned, that includes environmental health or whatever, that it should still act as a buffer strip with extensive landscaping requirements, even though the new dwellings at that stage were to be no nearer than 10 metres from the buffer strip. In this application, we have the officers doing a complete about turn and showing no concern at all for the adequate screening, or that at least one of the dwellings will be only 1.4 metres from the actual plant room for the high pressure water jet. 4. The sound consultant's report had to be revised because it had taken no account of the authorised and commenced residential development to the north. we actually pointed this out to the planning officer concerned. 2 of those dwellings are with gardens immediately adjacent to the buffer strip, and merely 1 metre, and the actual buildings 1 metre from the boundary of the buffer strip.
Mr. Thornton,
Since that revised report,
we are well and truly over 3 minutes. If you could just sum up, please. Thank you.
Yeah. Our architect spoke with the planners, indicating that the plans with the consultant's report were misleading, with the positioning of the northern boundaries out by 5 metres, and furthermore sound projections not made for the water jet sprays themselves. These have decibel levels in excess of 90. The officers have told us this is not of any consequence to that consultant's report, and we're not prepared to extend any consultation period. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
We oppose the application.
Mr. Marm, would you like to speak? I think as I've left the gentleman, previous speaker, slightly more than 3 minutes, I'm going to be a bit flexible for that. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you again for your time this evening. Again, our principal objective here is to serve the community in a better way. Electrical vehicles are becoming a growing part of our economy, and it's part of the government's plan to get us towards net zero. Infrastructure for electrical vehicle charging is challenging, and as a business we are striving to provide electrical vehicle owners with a robust network of EV charging solutions. So again, I would ask you to consider the comments from the planning officer, from the environmental health. We've conducted the noise assessments and willingly undertook a second noise assessment when the point was pointed out about the dwellings to the north. So thank you again for your time this evening. It's greatly appreciated you considering our application. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Marr. Before I move the recommendation, do members have any questions for the planning officer about this planning application? Councillor Savage.
Going by the first speaker's comments, you mentioned decibel ratings of 90 dB. Is that an accurate figure for the emissions from the jet washing at that point?
Sorry, bear with me. I've got the noise impact assessment. So the jet wash is on page 11, if anyone's got a copy of, is shown to have a sound power level of 78 decibels, according to the noise impact assessment that's been submitted as a result of this. Below 80.
Councillor Thornton.
Thank you. In 2020, Environmental Health stated there was concerns regarding the proximity of the garage to the proposed new dwellings of the time, which are now the ones that have consent. And there was a number of complaints that they'd received back then. Do you have access to the information from Environmental Health regarding the complaints that were raised at the time?
As I've said on the previous item, I don't have access to the Environmental Health's record system.
Councillor Savage.
Just for clarification, it mentions in the report that there's no consultation being received or even sought from the fire service with respect to the EV chargers being on the petrol station forecourt. Do you not think it would be prudent for us to actually have some kind of expert advice on the nature of that installation next to petrol pumps?
If that's something that members would like to receive, then it's something we could certainly look at receiving advice from the fire service. The reason it's not been undertaken so far is it's not a statutory requirement to do so. But if that's something that members would want to seek, then that could be arranged.
Councillor Lillis.
Thank you, Chair. A similar vein of thought, really. On page 25, consultation responses, it says that there were no responses provided by UK Power Networks. I mean, given the nature of the beast, I would have thought that's quite a significant issue that's lacking for us. And if you're going to go away and find some further information for the fire risk assessment, could you also do that for the UK Power Networks as well?
It is certainly something we could look at. However, it's not uncommon for us not to receive anything from UK Power Networks, and it's actually very much a struggle for us to get something out of a consultation response from them.
Councillor Thornton.
Can you tell me what the distance is between the EV charging and the petrol pumps, please?
Offhand, no, I don't have access to something that I can measure off of, and I haven't got that measurement pre-prepared.
We were actually on site yesterday, and Councillor Savage might be able to answer that.
From the canopy to the nearest pump, which is the middle one, that first one is around 7 to 8 metres away, not very far at all.
Councillor Mountford.
Thank you. Just going back on to delinquent information from UK Power Networks. Well, if we want it, we're asking for it and requesting it, can it not be put on the responsibility of the applicant to try and get that information to support it?
There's no requirement for them to provide a response, and so we can't put that onto the applicant, because otherwise we might find ourselves in the situation of not being able to make a recommendation on an item because the consultee is not providing a response, and that's outside of our control and the applicant's.
Understand it's out of their control as well as yours, but at least if they've tried, I'm just saying it's another avenue to request information to support their application. They might be more motivated.
Councillor Thornton.
In the information that I have been able to find, and there doesn't seem to be very much about, the safe distance is 15 to 30 metres that they recommend, and I know it's not statutory, but ours is very much below that. Is it? Am I correct in that assumption?
So there's no requirements under planning legislation or anything under planning law that dictates the requirements of how EV chargers should be set out in relation to petrol station forecourts or pumps. We've been informed by the applicant, there's what's known as the Blue Book, which is how petrol station forecourt operators design and operate their forecourts. However, there isn't anything under planning legislation.
Okay.
Councillor Savage.
I've actually got two questions, but maybe I'll do the first one first. And just on that point, then, the Blue Book that you mentioned, does it actually mention anything in there about EV chargers as part of the design of petrol station forecourts?
The Blue Book, like a lot of industry standards, is a purchase only, so it's behind a paywall. We don't have access to it because we don't require access to it as part of the planning process.
Councillor Lillis.
Thank you, Chair. Steve, on page 30, and I'll let you work your way through your agenda, under ecology, and it may well be a typo or it may be me missing the trick, but second paragraph, second sentence, it reads, "It is considered unlikely that the proposal would have a limited impact on wildlife breeding," which tells me that it is likely. Is that not the case?
Apologies, I feel that one of those words is erroneously in there. I would say that it's a typographical error, and it potentially it should be read that it is considered that the proposal would have a limited impact, with the omission of unlikely at the beginning of the sentence. No.
Councillor Raycott.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I would completely agree with the suggestion that we contact Essex Fire Brigade to get their opinions on this matter. One of the reasons being that I don't have an electric vehicle, but when I've been to motorway service stations and even supermarket on Canvey, they've got a charging point, but the most they have is 2 charging points, not 6. So I'm not quite sure whether that those should be looked at, what safety measures will be required.
So is that the question, Councillor Raycott?
The other one was, are there any, I haven't noticed, I've been told, if there's any hours on which these these electrical charging points are in use. Yeah. I mean, will they shut down at the time the petrol pumps are stopped, or are they going to go on 24 hours a day? Thank you.
Yes, so to answer your last question first, the proposed hours, it's proposed that the electric vehicle chargers be operational 24 hours a day. And then in relation to the number of electric vehicle charging points, as far as I'm aware, there is no limit. Over at the Shell garage that I showed pictures of at Rayleigh Weir, they've got 8. They've just installed 8 there. We've also recently granted planning permission for the auto halt service station on the A127 to have at least 6, maybe possibly 8 EV chargers there as well. So it's not uncommon to have more than just 2 in one location.
Councillor Savage.
So we're making a bit of an assumption here that the nearest ignition source to the petrol pumps, if you like, being a car that potentially is on fire is 8 metres, and I only paced that out. But you also bring into that forecourt a fuel tanker to actually service them pumps, which is considerably longer than a car. So which one of those pumps has got the inlet points for the fuel tanks, if at all it's in the area? I'd like to know where the fuel tanker loads them tanks up on that fuel station.
So that would be where the inlet is actually situated?
Yeah, and where the vents are.
That's not something that I'm aware of, and it's not something that we would consider under the planning application.
Are there any more questions? The planning officer's recommendation is that planning permission be granted subject to the conditions set out in the report as amended. For the purposes of debate, I move the recommendation. Who would like to speak first? Councillor Savage.
It's my roadshow tonight, I think. I have a massive issue with this, and it's got nothing to do with the jet washers at the back. It's to do with those car chargers at the front, or to the side, should I say. I was at County Hall on Thursday last week, and I actually asked the senior fire officer, because he's part of the Police Crime Commissioner panel, what his feeling was about car chargers, and he just goes back to the standard. Most fires in domestic premises are caused by electrical charges or electrical faults generally. Most of you know that I worked for Shell for many, many years. Most of you know that I was in the health, safety and role for the last 10 years. But what you possibly don't know is that I was trained as an electrician. So I've done electrical engineering, and I know a little bit about batteries. Now, there's a fundamental difference between a car catching fire on there, because they can automatically stop them pumps, and pretty much any one of us with the right bit of training could put a car fire out. But if one of those electric cars catches fire, you ain't putting it out, and neither the fire brigade, by the way. They put a blanket over the top of them and they just let them burn. So the fact that it's not a planning prerequisite, the fact that the fire service aren't a statutory consultee, for me is shocking. Technology has moved faster than planning. Yeah. Now, in reality, you get 6 cars parked up there charging all at the same time, and one of them catches fire. You back away, potentially all 6 of them are going up. Potentially. Now, I know we look at likelihood and severity in incidents like this, But they don't just catch fire, they explode. That's a fundamental thing with lithium batteries, okay? Now, Audi and Porsche have just recalled all the e-trons and the Caymans recently because they've got a fundamental problem with the design of their batteries, and they recognise that they can potentially explode. That was in the media only recently. We could have a miniature Grenfell Towers here. If you imagine just for a second, okay, that the fire service were a statutory consultee in a planning application to put lagging around the outside of Grenfell Towers, you would hope that someone with a bit of a brain would go, hang on a minute, that stuff's that's highly flammable, that stuff. Maybe we should pull that. This is a classic example of where the system, the process that we operate, hasn't caught up. That is fundamentally flawed. And irrespective of whether we've got them on in Rochford or the Shell station down by the Raleigh Weir there or anywhere else, the reason they've probably got them is because they've been in exactly the same position as us, sitting around a chamber and they go, well, that's not a planning consideration. Well, it bloody well should be. Because from my experience, hazardous area classifications,
if you could sum up, please, Councillor Savage.
It's a high risk situation we're producing here by putting them next to them petrol pumps. And I would not, I don't know what I'm going to find to vote against it, but I will not be approving this.
Would anyone else like to speak? Councillor Anderson.
Just a matter of opinion. I wasn't an electrician. I was a mechanical engineer and a draftsman and a CAD draftsman. But I question what's just been said about electric batteries. Electric batteries has gone forward, the science of it has gone forward quite a bit. And I would question the influence or the excitement is the word I've got, of exaggerating what could happen with these batteries. I would question that. I'm not saying that the councillor's wrong, but I would question that. And what I would question is we need more details as to the layout of that a garage there with the petrol station next to the batteries. I would still question that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Skipp.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I have no expertise in this field, but when I hear people like Councillor Savage, who appears to know what he's talking about, mentions all these concerns, I think it'd be foolish for us to ignore that, and I would like to see some more information from the fire service as to the possible risks before we approve this.
Thank you, Councillor Skipp. Councillor Mountford.
Thank you, Chair. I agree with colleague Councillor Skipp, and even if you ignore Councillor Savage's experience, just as a regular, councillor trying to look at the planning permission on here, it's wider than just the rules of what the officer and is constrained to work in. It's a highly inflammable petrol station, and if we were just putting that in now, right next to however many dwellings there, we would be questioning it. But we're now doubling that, perhaps tripling it. And I don't think we are armed with enough information to be able to make an informed decision, because you've got a house several metres away with 6 small bombs that could go off. And that's how I look at it in very, crude layman's terms.
I'm just going to let Stephen come back on that.
I take on board what you're saying. I'd just like to highlight a point that you said, that you've identified that as planners we're constrained by the rules that are before us. I'd also like to say that the committee is also constrained by those same rules. Unfortunately, it may be the case that planning legislation hasn't quite caught up to technological developments, but unfortunately we have to work within the confines of what we have here and now.
Councillor Thornton.
I'd like to say I'm not an expert, but it didn't take me very long to have a scout round and find the recommendations, albeit them not statutory, as to what was a safe distance. And from what you've said, this isn't a safe distance. So I'd like further information, please.
Would anyone else like to speak? Sorry, you've had your opportunity, Mr. Martin. Members, the motion before you is for approval. May I have a show of hands, those for the motion? Those against the motion? And no abstentions. Now we need an alternative motion based upon a planning condition. Who would like to propose such a motion? Councillor Lillis.
Sorry, Chair. Could we not have another deferral? I thought that's where we were sort of going with this, so that Steve can go away and get the risk assessments and hopefully a response from UK Power Networks.
Would you like to respond to that, Steve?
So we couldn't require a risk assessment to be undertaken because it's not part of the planning process. If members want us to, we can go away and we can request Essex Fire Safety consultation response. We can also chase UK Power Networks. However, I can't guarantee we will receive a response. We will try, but yes, we could go away and try and get a response from Essex Fire Safety.
Councillor Savage.
I just want to some degree, apologise to yourself, Stephen, because ultimately you're between a rock and a hard place here. We appreciate that, but from the last two, applications that have come through, you can obviously see that the 9 of us are also between that rock and a hard place, and just because it's been done before doesn't make it right. And I think for me personally, I apologise if I've come across a bit rash or a bit whatever, but from my experience, when things like that go, when it goes wrong badly. Yeah. So I just want to say that. So apologies from.
We need someone to second that motion then. So the amended motion would be to ask the officer to defer for more reports in terms of health and safety. Yep.
With the deferrals, have we got any guarantee that they will come back to DMC, or do we have to go through the process of calling them in again? Thank you.
The items, the previous one and this one, will return to committee for consideration.
May I just clarify?
Yeah.
So just to clarify, so you're deferring for further reports from Essex Fire Safety and the report from UK Power Networks. Yep.
Sorry, can I just add, Chair? I think we also, Councillor Thornton asked for some information on safety distances between fuel dispensers and the chargers, because that's unclear.
Can I just add there, probably the better course of action would be to go to the Health and Safety Executive, because in terms of hazardous areas, you'd be looking at area classification drawings to give you safe distances from, ignition sources. But I'm trying to put this in layman's terms. There's a lot of highfalutin words I could use, but yeah. So I would also go to the HSE.
I don't think we could ask for information about the safe distances between sort of, as you were mentioning earlier, where the fill ports are. My understanding is very layman's terms, but that sort of thing, because it's not part of the planning process. However, we can, if members are alongside the fire safety and UK Power Networks, we could also consult the Health and Safety Executive to see if they have any objections as well.
So just for completeness, so Councillor Lewis, are you happy with that amendment adding on the outset? And Councillor Sage still happy to second. So that's what we'll take. So now
we're now
vote on that, Chair.
So we are now voting on a motion to defer pending reports as previously mentioned. A show of hands, those for the motion. Unanimous. The amended motion is approved. Item 4. This is the one you've been waiting for. Waterside Farm Sports Centre, Canvey Island. I'll now hand over to the planning officer to present this item.
Thank you, Chairman. So this application has been presented to the Development Management Committee as this is an application by the Council on Council-owned land. And again, similar to the last application, this is a full application, so all aspects of the proposal can be considered. So to provide a bit of context, we've got the existing Waterside Leisure Centre located here to the south of Somnes Avenue, and you've got the existing football pitch located here. You've also got the car park, and there's a skateboard park here as well. You can see this on the aerial. You've got the running track over there along with Canvey Road, and the football pitch. As part of this application, the football pitch is sort of approaching, I think it's well over 10 years old now, and the surface needs renewing. So permission is sought to replace the existing surface of the pitch, replace the existing perimeter fencing, extend the area, some areas of hard standing slightly to the sides, so that spectators have something solid to stand on, replace the 4 existing floodlights with 6 new LED ones, and provide a storage container for storage of maintenance equipment. So if I flick through here briefly, you'll notice that the pitch is set up with small little sort of concrete hard standing areas behind the goals at each end, and also the smaller pitches which run widthways across. The proposal is to extend these areas to the side slightly. I'll come on to that later. And at the moment, you can see these were pictures taken earlier today. You've got the existing high-level fencing around the site. You've got the skate park to this side, and here's some more photographs for context with the lighting columns. The proposed site plan is to still provide these runoff areas, but on this side here and behind the goals at each end provide a larger area of hard standing for spectators to stand on, and also as a runoff area. Around the edge of the pitch is proposed to be a lower level fencing similar to this, and then there'd be the area of hard standing followed by a higher level fence similar to what is currently there at the moment. Floodlights similar to these are proposed, which will be located around the pitch, and a shipping container is proposed in the northwestern corner of the pitch to provide maintenance equipment and storage for goals and other equipment to do with the use of the pitch. You can see that located here, and each of the floodlights are proposed sort of evenly spaced along the sides of the pitch here. And just as a comparison, a lighting report has been undertaken which compares the existing light spill from the existing floodlights, which are the yellow and orange colours, and the darker blues and purples are the proposed light spill from the new floodlights. So it demonstrates that the light spill from them will be a lot less, so there'll be less impact on its surroundings. So just covering some of the key considerations mentioned in the report. From the flood risk point of view, the proposal is considered to have passed the sequential test, as it is required in this location as it's refurbishing the existing pitch. There isn't an area anywhere else that would be more suitable, as replacing the pitch in a different location wouldn't be suitable. However, it doesn't require the proposal from requiring an adequate flood response plan to set out what will happen prior to, during and after a flood. There is a condition proposed requiring the submission of such a plan. Whilst the proposal is located within the Greenbelt, paragraph 149 permits the provision of appropriate facilities for outdoor sport and recreation as not being an appropriate development as long as it preserves the openness of the Greenbelt. In combination, a lot of the pitch is already there, the fencing is already there, the floodlights are already there. There would be the net addition of a small additional area of hard standing around the site, 2 new lighting columns and a shipping container, which would it's officers' opinion that those would be viewed in the backdrop, against the backdrop of the existing skate park and the existing facilities at Waterside Leisure Centre. So it's not considered that that would represent significant harm that would weigh against the proposal, especially when considered against the value of the proposal in promoting healthy lifestyles for the community. It's also, the land is currently allocated as public open space. The proposal would not be materially altering this, and whilst the fenced-in area would be getting slightly larger to account for the slightly larger areas of hard standing, it's not considered that this takes away from the overall function of the larger area, and overall it's considered that this has a fairly minimal effect, and no objection has been raised on this basis. As I mentioned before on the lighting design, the impact of the proposal on residents has been considered, and it's considered that it wouldn't have a significantly greater and would have the potential to have a lesser impact on residents, and therefore the recommendation before you this evening is for approval. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Before I move the recommendation, do members have any questions for the planning officer about the planning application? Councillor Mountford.
Hi, just one quick one, in case I've missed it, but what's the dimensions for completeness? What's the dimensions of the new pitch? I could only see dimensions for the old pitch. It's, if you don't know.
So for reference along, I don't know, oh, hang on a sec, no. So you've got from corner to corner here is labelled as 91 metres, and from width to width is 55 metres. Is that? Yeah, that's what it says.
The existing pitch is 65 by 101, per the report. Or is that perhaps the new dimensions?
The dimension, yeah, the dimensions on this proposed drawing show it as being 91 by 55 metres wide. However, it might be that they're taking into consideration the areas to the runoff areas to the side.
Thank you.
Councillor Aycock.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This pitch, this is going to be available for any football group to hire from the Borough Council? Thank you.
So whilst it doesn't form part of material planning consideration or a planning reason, I do know that currently the pitch is rented out to a number of local football groups. I know Concord Rangers and things like that, they train there. And I believe it's to propose that practice is to continue as part of this and be rented out to any group who wishes to use it.
Councillor Thornton.
Do we know within the proposal what material, what the pitch is going to be, please?
We've just been provided with the information that it's going to be resurfaced. It's currently a 3G pitch, and so it's assumed that it will be resurfaced as a 3G pitch.
There has been some concerns shown from the Football Association and various others regarding the material because of the shredding of the microplastics used, and they've come up with a joint statement of the type of pitch that should be used. Could we condition it that that is looked into and we have the correct type of pitch, please?
There wouldn't be a requirement that we could make the applicant, which although it's the council, go away and look at alternative material uses, because what is being presented to us is what we are considering this evening. I know that the Football Association have different views on what materials should and shouldn't be used. However, that's if they're to accredit it, if they want to seek accreditation.
Sports Wales, Ground Management Association, the Football Association, Rugby Football League, Sports and Play Construction Association and England Rugby. They've made a joint statement with a recommendation of what type of pitches should be used. Is there no way we could attach ourselves to that?
I don't see a material planning reason why we could present a condition, and it would need to meet the 6 conditions tests.
Because of the environment. It's an environmental concern that they've put forward.
So it would need to meet the 6 conditions tests, which are that the condition is, sorry, I've gone blank, it's in the NPPF, that the, where is it? It's, the conditions must be necessary, relevant to the development at hand. Can you remember what paragraph they are?
Precise, enforceable, reasonable in all other respects.
Yeah. So, yeah, sorry, I found it. Found it now. So,
I think what we're perhaps saying is that conditions on planning permissions, the default position is you shouldn't be putting them on. If you do want to put some conditions on, you should only be putting them on to make a development that would otherwise be unacceptable in planning terms acceptable. So we have to ask ourselves the question, would the development be unacceptable if that condition wasn't there? And the answer to that is, well, no, it wouldn't, because all they're doing is relaying their existing pitch.
If it's shedding microplastics that's bad for the environment, then it is detrimental.
Yeah, but it's doing that now. It's not making it any worse.
we can't require under an application to improve an existing situation that already exists.
Councillor Savage.
I do tend to agree with Councillor Thornton. Ultimately, this is a council pitch. It's our pitch. If we can do something to make that better, even before it gets built, we should be attempting to do it.
So we have to deal with what's presented us tonight. I know it's a council application. I feel that it might be better off placed dealing with Trudy or Shane under a different department. They have more power over what materials are used. At the moment, which before us is for a replacement pitch of sort of like for like.
Are there any other questions? Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just reading the conclusion, Steve. You say on page 42, the existing pitch was initially constructed in 1991, which we know, and the existing 3G surface was installed in 2013. Due to the age of the facility, the design and layout of the pitch therefore does not accord with the FA's current design guidance. So, what we're proposing to replace it with, does it meet this guidance? I guess that's the question. Thank you.
I don't know whether it meets the requirements. As Keith said, it's not really pertinent to the planning application at hand, because if it's not acceptable at the moment, it doesn't meet the FA's requirements. Is it basically, you've got to ask yourself, would you refuse permission because it's not going to meet the FA's requirements going forward? It's not a requirement that I'm under any planning policies that we have that pitches must meet the FA's requirements. And therefore we can't force it or condition it or request that it has to meet the FA's requirements. However, it is up to the applicant whether they want to develop it to meet the FA's sort of accreditation scheme and the FA's requirements. But as I say, it's not something that we can require or condition under the planning application.
Councillor Savage.
So just to clarify, and I think I'm on the same page. Today we're just authorising the planning application to change that pitch. We will have an opportunity to go back to both the environmental group under Trudy and request, maybe through scrutiny committee, that requirement is met within prior to the installation of this pitch. Am I right in that thinking? Is that the mechanism that we would adopt?
So if permission were to be granted tonight, permission would be granted, and it would be possible for the applicant, the council, to go ahead and construct in accordance with the details. So they could go ahead and construct it in accordance and put down a 3G pitch. However, there is the mechanism, as you've identified, that members may be able to go and speak to, and an alternative material may be put forward in speaking to Trudy at various committees or cabinets.
Councillor Mountford.
Thank you, Chair. I think if you read the statement, I think the first point is covered, and it's such as the surface, fencing and lighting, which has been replaced and is in need of renewal to be fit for purpose, which to me reads that it probably is fitting with the FA, but I think it's a point that we should clarified, but I'd be surprised if they don't, due to the funding aspect, etc. And is probably out of our realm of responsibility here.
Are there any other questions? The planning officer's recommendation is the planning permission should be granted subject to the conditions set out in the report. For the purposes of debate, I move the recommendation. Who would like to speak first? Councillor Anderson.
Thank you, Chairman. I think this is a great thing for Canvey Island. I think it's marvellous. New pitch get put down there, new floodlights, an extension round the perimeter. I think it's absolutely smashing. When I was a teenager, I played in red gravel pitches in Glasgow Green. Now, that's a surface that's quite hard, and I played in that, and we got by on it. This is marvellous. This is like sunshine. It's like happiness. What a great thing for Canvey Island. Let's have it, please.
Councillor Lillis.
Thank you, Chair. I think everyone knows that I like a good news story, and it is a good news story. Yeah, it's currently not fit for purpose. It needs replacing. It's a wonderful asset for Castle Point. My own son has trained on the 3G service, and yeah, it's showing its age, a bit like me. So it is a good news story. The only thing I would say is this is taxpayers' money, so I think we just need to make sure that the question is asked somewhere, whether it's on Cabinet or on a scrutiny committee, that what we're laying down here is going to last another 10 years. And we're not going to be held by the FA in 2 years' time and them saying, no, you can't use this for X, Y and Z reasons. But thank you.
Councillor Skipp.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I mean, I agree with Councillor Lewis. This is a great asset for Castle Point, not just for Canvey Island. We represent the whole of the borough. As long as there is a mechanism for looking into the use of materials that we can take by some other committee, I'm quite happy to support this application.
Thank you. Councillor Thornton.
I think it goes without saying that it's an absolutely wonderful opportunity for Canvey, and it's something that we should be doing. However, I do want it on record that we should be looking into the shedding of the microplastics and taking every opportunity to renew this to a much better standard.
Thank you, Councillor Thornton. Councillor Mountford.
Thank you, Chair. Hopefully this will be it. I agree with Councillor Thornton. We should look into that, but I don't think it affects or should detract away from the great news for Castle Point and for Canvey. And I know it's used borough-wide, and I think it's great to, it's effectively football 300 or whatever sport is being placed on there, predominantly football, 365 days a year from morning, noon until early evening, and with the reduced lighting and probably cheaper to run. It's good, and it's a very long overdue, I think saying it will last longer than 10 years, I don't think it was originally put in to even last that long. So it's already paid for itself over and over. I think it's really good news for Castle Point. And so well done, Castle Point.
Thank you, councillors. Members, the motion before you is for approval. May I have a show of hands? Those for the motion. The application is approved, and that concludes the business for this evening. Thank you very much for attending, and very good evening.